Welcome to the workshop on multiple choice question creation. This workshop is going to teach you how to create better multiple choice questions which you can use as testing instruments for evaluating your students. Okay, the first question which arises is, when should we use multiple choice questions as an instrument to test our students' knowledge or learning? It would be a good choice to use multiple choice question instruments when we have a very clear objective of what we want to test, and if we want to receive quick feedback on student comprehension of the material before we proceed further to continue with our course. The use of multiple choice questions is a good choice because it quickly lets you know what your students are understanding, and then you can build on that to proceed further. Also, multiple choice questions can be used to increase the confidence of your students. For example, if you want to teach your students something and then you want to test whether your students understood that part of the material, you can quickly give them a multiple choice test. And if your students answer those questions correctly, then it might increase the level of confidence that your students have on the material, on their understanding of the material. Also, like I mentioned before, it is a quick and very practical way to test your students' comprehension of the material before you move further to more diverse course materials. Now the question arises, when should we not use multiple choice questions to test our students' understanding? Um, For example, when we are trying to differentiate between recalling material and learning material, multiple choice questions may tend to test more of a recall of material than learning. And we might be able to use other better testing instruments to evaluate student learning. For example, it might be a project or an essay question or an application scenario. Also, when we are trying to test concepts, it is not easy to create multiple choice testing instruments which can test students' understanding of concepts. So perhaps multiple choice test items are not a good idea to use when we are trying to test students' understanding of concepts which are deep. The other issue that arises also is that multiple choice testing items can enable students to guess through a test. So if they don't know the answer, it may appear that they know their answer just because they were able to answer a multiple choice test question correctly.
Now we'd like to look at what are the parts of a multiple choice question. The question part or the problem is often called a STEM, and if you were to do research on this, that's probably the terminology that you would find. And then the alternatives or answers include a correct answer and then several incorrect answers or distractors as they are known. Here are our tips on writing the multiple choice problem or STEM question. First, you want to keep in mind your learning objectives. Always be sure that you are asking a particular question that points to a learning objective that was covered in class, in lecture, in the book, something that you want to be sure that your students know. Right off the bat, we'd like to make a note of remembering to use complete sentences in the formation of questions. An incomplete sentence such as "the capital of Canada is" might be better as a fill-in-a-blank question rather than a multiple choice question, versus a complete sentence of "what is the capital of Canada." That is asking a very specific question. Your learning objective probably was to make sure that the students knew what the capital of Canada was, and they can answer that question very directly.
Continuing on the tips for creating a good multiple choice question item, if you look at the example on the screen, you will find that on the left hand side we have an example of a question which is not really very meaningful, and the other question on the right hand side is an example of a meaningful question. Now, why is that? A meaningful question, that is the left example, is a question, for example here, which statement is true, and then there are 4 options which the student can choose from. Now this particular question is not meaningful in this context because this question could have been delivered through a true and false question type of a question rather than a multiple choice test item. If we look at the good example or the more meaningful example, you will find that over here this question on the right hand side actually tests students' knowledge because it asks the questions, what are pet rats called? So here the students really need to know, or they must have the knowledge of what pet rats are called to be able to answer this question correctly. This is an example of a question which has a lot of irrelevant material, and we should keep in mind that the question stem here in this case has irrelevant material. It gives an introduction and it tells information that is not required to answer the question. So in a testing situation where students have very little time and they already have a lot of anxiety while taking the test, it's better not to overload students with additional cognitive material which they have to process. So a direct question like what is the actual cause of the bubonic plague is better than a question like this, which gives a little introduction before coming to the question directly.
One thing you want to watch out for in creating multiple choice questions is to try to avoid using negative phrasing. Negative phrasing includes which of the following is not true or all of the following are true except. These questions can confuse students, so you want to make sure that if you do have to use a question like this, that you emphasize the word not or except. You can use capital letters, you can use italics. Definitely try to minimize the use of negative phrasing in questions because it slows the students down. They not only have to know the answer to the question, but they also have to figure out what question exactly are you asking. So in terms of giving a speedy test, try to avoid using negative phrasing.
Okay, so you have to remember that there is only one right answer to your question in a multiple choice testing situation. So do not give options in the answer area where there might be more than one right answer. And we will see in the subsequent slides why that is the case. Another tip is list your answers logically, by which we mean that if you are following a particular like a numerical format or an alphabetical format, place the answers in the answer options area logically. Don't confuse the students by giving materials which will not help them reach their true potential. Also, don't let your STEM or any of the answer options provide students with clues. Because if that is the case, then you are not really testing students' knowledge of the material. You're providing them clues by which they can get away from answering, even if they don't know the correct answer. Plausibility, this is another important thing we should have to keep in mind. For example, if you look at this question that we have here, who is the main character of the movie Ratatouille, and we have 4 options. The problem with these options, answer options, is that 2 of the options B and C are very improbable because Scooby-Doo and George Washington, any student with any kind of prior knowledge will be able to eliminate those options from the situation even when he or she may not know the right answer. So try to make all 4 options very plausible so that you end up testing the student's understanding of the content rather than their ability to guess or to eliminate the implausible items from the choices.
Another tip is to make sure that you are very clear and concise in your questions. Try not to be too wordy. Our goal of multiple choice questions is to offer a very quick testing format for students, so you don't want to double their cognitive load by having them read a big long paragraph to get to the one-line answer or question, excuse me, at the very end. Make sure that you're not too wordy in your questions or answers. Another tip is to make sure that the answers are mutually exclusive. You want to be sure that there is only one right answer available to the students. This will help you in the long run because there'll be a lot less question or point adjustments, and it will also help the students. It will help them not be frustrated that there could have been two right answers, and it will help them choose the correct one. In this example, we ask who is the main character of Ratatouille. If any of you have seen this movie, there is a cute little rat who wants to be a chef, and he has his real-life human chef buddy. The rat's name is Remy, and the human's name is Linguini. It can be argued from both sides that either character is the main character of the movie. And so rather than offer both characters in the answer selection, only offer the answer that you want your students to pick and then offer them plausible alternatives.
Okay, this is stemming from what we just discussed in the prior slide. We should not provide any clues in the answer options to the students, available to the students, or also in the stem of the question, which provides clues to the correct answer. Because in that case, the students will be able to answer the question without actually knowing the content. A few methods to do that is we should try to use homogeneous content, by which I mean if you are, for example, creating a question which pertains to a particular topic in biology, make sure that your STEM as well as the answer options all pertain to that topic and not to some other topic, for example, in physics or math. Because if it does, then it will be easy for students to eliminate the physics and math options and then guess that the STEM is referring to a particular option which relates to biology. Also, watch out for your grammar. Make sure that if you're using the particular tense in the STEM, maintain that same tense in all the answer options, because if you do not, the students will be easily able to guess that the stem of the tense used in the STEM can be matched with the correct answer option STEM answer option without knowing the content, just by virtue of those two being in the same tense, and they'll be able to eliminate the wrong answers. In that case, they don't know the answer, but they can just do it because they know correct grammar. Parallel form, this is kind of the same thing we talked about earlier. Try to maintain the same voice, the same tense in your STEM as well as in the answer options. Also, the answer options available should be similar in length, because if not, it would be easier for your students to guess that the correct answer is of a longer or shorter length than the incorrect ones, because we all know that it's kind of redundant for a person to be writing long sentences for incorrect answers. So this gives an opportunity for students to guess the correct answer without knowing the content. Another thing to keep in mind is when we are writing answer options, should not be using phrases like all of the above or none of the above, because this allows the students to guess. Again, because if the student knows one of the answer options to be correct or two of them to be correct, then it is easy for that person to surmise that all of the above is the correct answer option without actually knowing the other two to be correct. So it kind of allows students to guess without knowing the content. So make sure that you don't allow these sweeping sentences to come into your answer options area.
So we touched on the logical ordering of answers before. Some of the options for logical ordering are listing things alphabetically, listing numerical items highest to lowest or lowest to highest, making it a little bit easier to read. There are lots of other logical ways to list answers, but as long as it's something that everybody can understand, it helps the students avoid bias. If you're a professor who likes to put the correct answer on C, this will help students from picking C for every answer because they figured you out. So use a logical order on your questions, be consistent throughout your exam, and that will help avoid further guessing on your test questions. The students who are answering the questions correctly will be answering them correctly because they know the answer, not because they are great detectives. You'll also want to look out for complex choices. This example is pretty self-explanatory. What is the reason the restaurant closed at the end of Ratatouille the movie? We have several reasons listed, and then at the bottom we have the whole slew of A and B are correct, A, B, and C are correct, B and C are correct. Perhaps you like to list things where A and B are correct, but D isn't correct. The more complex you are in these answer solutions, the more you're testing the student's ability to read and try to figure out what you're asking versus if they actually know the objective that they were taught. So try to avoid using this type of question if possible. You can also use a different type of question altogether for something like this. Perhaps this question could be best used as a short answer. Ask your students to list the 3 reasons why the restaurant closed. Then you're not giving them any options for guessing, and you're also not asking them to run the gauntlet at figuring out which question is asking, which answer is asking which.
Okay, there's other considerations which we need to take into account. One of them is cultural considerations. For example, different countries have different writing conventions and conventions of using short forms. For example, it might be appropriate in a convention of writing VS to denote verses in the United States or in the Western English-speaking world. However, that same symbolism may not apply in other countries of the world. So that might have the potential of confusing your students. There might be some other examples also.
So at the testing center, we run into many different types of questions that have brought us to believe that cultural considerations are really important. Sometimes people ask common words. An example is the word horizontal. A student was confused as to what that meant. Even though they knew what it meant, they could not connect the word horizontal to the meaning. So make sure that you're using common words that you've used in class, that have been covered in lecture or in the book, or both. Also, don't assume understanding with complex topics. Sometimes another thing that we've run into is the student was confused of the symbols versus the use of the whole entire word, and they asked, you know, what is this positive symbol? Does that mean positive? So make sure that you're covering material that you know the students know. A good way to actually help the students prepare for this is to provide them not necessarily examples from the test, but how are you going to ask them questions? Maybe give them a chance to get used to your type of questions, how you speak in your test questions. Another solution that we've come up with for cultural considerations is to reach out and start networking. We have a lot of different international options here on campus. Perhaps there's somebody out there who would be happy to look over your exam. So make sure that you're using the resources that you have available, and this will help kind of cut out some of the problems you might run into with just questions from students who are from different countries. And that is our presentation on multiple choice. Please feel free to direct any questions to us. We're more than happy to discuss, and then we'll also still be providing the live workshops. There's lots of time for discussion on those, and you are more than welcome to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.